Hello YouTube, and welcome to Frostgrave Friday. This is episode 1, and I'm Mac Attack 001. So, what is Frostgrave Friday? Well, first off, Frostgrave is a fantasy skirmish wargame. It is very light on the rules, kind of what we call a beer and pretzels game. With that said, why Frostgrave Fridays? Well, this is basically going to chronicle my journey from ground zero all the way up to having battle reports from the various wizard factions within Frostgrave. What do we start out with? Well, basically the only thing that you need is this book. This is the absolute bare minimum that you need in terms of in terms of the rules. This covers everything, including the spells, how to build your warband, and your warband's number 10 maximum, and that includes your wizard, so basically 9 soldiers plus your wizard. Covers a little bit of the backstory, but not a whole lot about Frostgrave. It has a campaign system, it has ways to level up your various soldiers, your wizard. Beyond this, you're going to need a tape measure, 2 20-sided dice, and at least 10 miniatures to represent your warband. And if you're kind of hosting things, then you might want to have up to 30, I think it's 32 miniatures for the various random encounters that can take place. And there's an encounters section back in the bestiary, which covers all the various monsters that you can come across. And these include things like skeletons, armored skeleton, zombies, ghoul, bear, boar, giant rat, ice spider, snow leopard, wild dogs, wolf, I should say wolves, a worm, and not the type that you fish with, werewolves, minor demons, minor constructs, white gorilla. Did I already say snow leopard? I think I did. Vampire, wraith, large construct. And constructs are basically golems. And that's the D&D golem, not the Lord of the Rings golem. Frost giants, and that pretty much covers it. So, in addition to the miniatures, the dice, the tape measure, you're going to need a table. Now, they can say that you can play on as small as 2x2, but we're going to be building up terrain and scenery for a 4x4 table, or pretty close to it actually. And so those are the items that you need. And I'm going to go through the whole process of getting these things and painting them up and assembling them, and we're going to cover the whole spectrum. So it'll be the entire journey. Now, in addition to Frostgrave, there's also a cool book called Thaw of the Lich Lord. And this is basically a campaign book. It has additional treasures, it has new soldiers, and while it's not necessarily a prerequisite for playing the game, it'll certainly add something to the game. And it's about $18, although I think you can find it cheaper on Amazon. Oh, speaking of which, this book, Frostgrave, runs about $25. Again, I think you can find it cheaper on Amazon. 131 pages. Now, so you have those 2 books, but you also have PDFs or ebooks on Osprey Publishing's site. And the first one that came out, I believe, was Sellsword, although actually I think it was The Hunt for Gollum, but we're gonna go with Sellsword first. Again, this is just a little add-on. It's not essential for the game to play the game. However, it introduces the captain, and we all need a captain for our warband, right? It also has several additional scenarios, but the really cool thing that it has is it has a wizard sheet and a warband sheet with your captain on it. So basically what that means then is that you can print these out, and so that you can have multiples, so if somebody shows up and they forgot their, wizard or their warband sheet, you can hand one of these to them and they can fill it out again and you can get playing. So that's the cool thing about Sellsword, and that goes for $3.95. I printed it out myself on a color printer, on my color printer, and had it bound by Staples, and that was like $4. So total of $8. Next we have The Hunt for Gollum, and it's a mini campaign. It's not a bad little buy, again, $3.95. So it might be something that you want to consider. Talking about the miniatures for a little bit, I'm looking at my notes, by the way. So talking about the miniatures. Now I went ahead and ordered from North Star Figures, which is based out of England, a box set of their cultists and their soldiers. These are on plastic sprues, and so they look actually pretty good. I wasn't quite as enamored with some of their other figures that looked like they were pewter. So I have an order of miniatures coming in from Reaper, and they should actually be here in a couple hours today. And so we'll be going through some of the alternative miniatures that I've sought out for Frostgrave. The other thing that you're going to want is 6 treasure tokens, and we'll cover on how to make your very own, because it's not that hard, and I'll show you how. And I'll actually have some PDFs for instructions that I'll put up on my website. Now, jumping back to the table and the terrain, we're basically going to be using what's known as hardboard in the United States. It's sometimes called MDF elsewhere, but in the United States it's actually hardboard is what we call it. I believe that this is an 1/8 inch thick, pretty doggone close to an 1/8 inch thick. I think it's a little bit over that. But anyway, this is tempered hardboard. I've run it through my table saw, gotten it 11 inches by 11 inches. And you're like, well, why 11 inches? Well, very simple reason. Because on top of that, we're going to be putting this monster stuff. This is 2-inch thick EPS. And that stands for extruded polystyrene. Now that's not to be confused with, do I have a piece of it around? XPS, which is expanded polystyrene. And XPS is known in the States as Dow Blue Board, and it's used mainly in construction for insulation where you need compressive strength. This particular EPS is a high density version that I got from a manufacturer, and it's cut precisely in 2-inch thicknesses, and I also have various thicknesses of it. The reason that I like this over, let's say, the stuff that you can get at Lowe's, which is the Dow Blue Board, is because I've noticed on some of the blue board that it varies, up to 1/8 of an inch. And that's not much. 1/8 of an inch in house construction is nothing. In miniature construction, on the other hand, 1/8 of an inch is big, and it's noticeable, and it's something that I personally avoid. So, and the reason I found this out was that I had based a bunch of Hearst Arts tiles on top of some Dow Blue Board. And when I went to match them up, place the tiles up together, I had, this 1/8 inch, high on one end and low on the other. And it's like, crap. So anyway, gonna go with this. That's me personally. Now, you're probably asking, why not just do, whatever it is you're going to do on this? A couple reasons. first off, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be putting on here is either latex or acrylic base, and that means it has a water emulsion in it. And as that dries, what happens is it shrinks. And so if you have stuff on this side and it shrinks, what's it going to do? It's going to warp it. It's going to bend it, so that these corners come up. However, if I use this on top of this, and I don't use, let's say, like wood glue to adhere the foam to this, and instead I use product like this, liquid nails, then I don't have that water emulsion, and I also, so I won't get that warping effect. The other important consideration on this, for me at least, is that while yes, a person could do just a flat mat, a printed mat. I've seen them, as a matter of fact, in Frostgrave, that's what they utilize. For me, I like a board that has visual impact. And visual impact for me comes in two directions. It comes from height and it comes from depth. So this board with that 2 inches, I'll be able to have stairs leading down, and like there's little basement apartments or access points to an underground or sewers and things like that. Something along the lines of what we saw in Skyrim over in, what was the name of the town on the water with the thief chick that it's where the Thieves Guild was located. I think it began with an R. I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, so something kind of along the lines of that. So that's the first point in the design consideration for the tabletop terrain. The other thing to think about is that they strongly suggest in this game that you limit your lines of sights to 11 inches. This is 11 inches. So when I'm setting up terrain, I know that if I have a board, a tile I should say, that has nothing, nothing to block line of sight on it, that I could be running into a problem. And part of the reason of that is that in Frostgrave, bows have a range of 24 inches. So they have a long range. So they can dominate. So you want to break up your lines of sight to smaller increments than that. One of the things that I'm going to show you how to fight against, and it is the chief problem with hardboard. And there you can see it right there. You see that? That is what we call displayed corner. And that's what happens when hardboard takes a knock on an edge. There's a way to fight it, not a foolproof way to prevent it, but a way to fight it. And I'll show you how we go about that, to add a little bit of extra strength to those corners. Our color palette. Frostgrave is known as the Frozen City. A long time ago, some wizard who should have known better cast a spell and created this monster blizzard that just blanketed the entire city and the region around it. I mean, he must have done something pretty bad in terms of opening up a portal to someplace he should have known better. The end result was that the city was frozen solid, buried underneath a blanket of snow for 10,000 years. Well, now the magic has receded and the snows have started to melt away, and there's this rush. It's kind of like a resource rush to get all the hidden magic and treasure recovered from the frozen city. When you're talking about a color palette like that, you want to instill a feeling of cold. And the best way to do that is to stick to the cooler end of your color palette. Doggone it, I should have grabbed my hold it right there. I'll be right back. All right, here we go. So, on the color palette here, this would be your warmer side of things. All the reds and the yellows. Over here is the cooler side of things, and this is your blues and your bluish hues. And so this is the color spectrum that I think that a person wants to stick with for the most part for Frostgrave. You want to give that cool, cold feeling to it. And so your blue violets, your blue greens, things of that nature. Now that doesn't mean that you can't do some OSL or object source lighting from like torches and things like that hanging up on walls. I think that's perfectly acceptable, and it would add a splash of color that would actually help break up the overall bluish tint to the scene. So there you go. There's our thought on how we're going to paint the vast majority of this. And we're going to go through the process, at least the process that I use for laying down snow and creating icicles. We're going to cover things like a new technique that I came up with, well, that I found. Well, maybe I came up with it. I don't know. We'll see. For doing roads and sidewalks and things like that. So I'm pretty excited about that. Now for the scenery side of things, and I differentiate. Terrain is the contours of the table that you're playing on. Scenery is the walls, the buildings, and everything else that's much more man-made. A lot of our walls we're going to be making for Frostgrave are going to be out of Hearst Art's new line of rubble bricks. Now I know you're looking at that and you're saying, well, gee, that doesn't look very ruined, but it will when we're done with it. And I'll show you how we're going to go about that. One of the first things I decided to do was to go through scenarios and just look at what type of terrain is required for this. And we're going to go through during this journey every single listed type of terrain that's required for the scenarios. And the first one is the mausoleum. One of the first things that we're going to be building is a 6-inch above ground mausoleum. It's going to be 6 inches on each side. It's going to have a door or an archway in each side. In addition to that, obviously, this is going to be set in a graveyard. And so, since Frostgrave, the frozen city, is set alongside a river, it made me think of New Orleans. So, I started building up some little mausoleums. These will be above ground mausoleums. And we're going to obviously put a roof on it and even block out the door or wall up the door, basically. So that'll be one element of it. The other element that we're doing is that we're building a bunch of above ground crypts for people, for corpses, I should say. But we're doing something a little bit different here. So that's the slab for the top of the crypt. The other thing that you can probably see there is that I went ahead and did some rather drastic zenithal highlighting. So obviously the top of it where the light's hitting it is much lighter than down underneath the lip here. And it's cool because when you set it down and I have my shop lights going, I mean, it really does, the light and the shadow does work that way. But I'm going to show you how I went about making this, and I think you'll enjoy that. Without getting too far ahead of myself, that pretty much is kind of an overview of some of the things that you can expect. Next time we'll be splitting up the video between going over the Reaper figs that I ordered to replace some of the North Star beasts and monsters and things like that. The other thing that we'll be doing is we'll be actually going through the process that I used to make this slab for the crypt. And we'll see how much time that has. If there's more time in the video, I'll go ahead and include a couple other things. In closing, upcoming, we're going to be starting another weekly event called Terrain Tuesdays. And this is going to have terrain projects that aren't directly tied to Frostgrave. And like I said, I'm a big fan of Hearst Art's molds, and this is one of his latest ones. This is the very thin rubble tile mold for like making houses and stuff. Timber A-frame houses, I should say. And I got all 5 of his molds for that. So we have the stucco, and then we have the wood planking, which is really nice because it has let's see, there we go, very rough hewn look to it. Like that a lot. And then this is what really sold it on it for me, is that here you have all the planks, and these will go over the seam lines of those, I'll step back here, of those tiles so that you can't see them. And so I think it'll paint up much faster because you'll be able to paint these before you put them on the base tiles, and so it should go a lot faster. So that's some of the stuff we're looking forward to on Terrain Tuesdays. Then, because I got a 3D printer recently, we're going to be covering some of the terrain projects that I've been doing on my 3D printer. And we're going to look at it warts and all, but we're also going to go through, and I'm going to explore some processes to deal with the resolution lines. Although I have to say, I'm printing this at 0.2 micron, and it really doesn't look bad. And you know, on a table, it looks, you know, at a distance, I mean, it looks positively gorgeous. Incredible detail on these models. This particular model is from Printable Scenery. As of right now, there's only 2 companies I know producing printed 3D printer terrain, and that's Fat Dragon with their Dragon Lock Dungeon series, and Printable Scenery. And Printable Scenery, I just got done funding their second Kickstarter, and it is pretty impressive. They have quite the array now. And so that is something that we're going to be going through on. So actually, if I was to show you here, so this is like the base unit, and then this unit fits over the top of it, and it has a little arch, or I should say little pillars that go down to help support it. And I mean, it's fully detailed. I don't know if I can show you that inside, but it's fully detailed inside like it is on the outside. So it's really good looking terrain. And I'm going to talk about the expense of it, how much filament I'm using, problems that are cropping up, how I'm going to finish it, how I'm going to spray it, and all of that. And so that's 3D Thursdays. Okay, well, thanks for hanging in there, for those of you that did, for the very first episode of Frostgrave Friday. Well, that does it for me, but I hope you'll tune in next week for another episode of Frostgrave Friday when we dig in to the nuts and bolts of it all. Thanks a lot, and as always, play games and have fun.